Welcome. Okay, so this is supply. Okay, so we talked about demand, the actions of buyers in a market. Now we're going to talk about supply, the actions of sellers in a market. Okay, so you're going to write down everything that's on the board and everything I say that sounds important. You're going to need to pause the video a bunch of times because I'm going to move pretty quickly through this, but you need to pause it to write things down and to write your own responses and think about how you would answer these questions. Okay, so actions of sellers in a market. So you probably have a lot of experience being a buyer, but you might not have experience being a seller. Okay, but if you've sold anything or you've provided any service, right, like babysitting or pet sitting or something, then you have some idea of what it's like to be a supplier. Okay, but you always have your own efforts. Okay, so we're going to generate a supply curve like we generated a demand curve, thinking about the wage that you would be willing to work different hours for at a part-time job. Okay, so thinking about a part-time job, okay, if they pay you $5 per hour, you're going to think about how willing you are to work, okay, how many hours you'd want to work per week, okay, and then we can think about $10 an hour, okay, and $15 an hour, okay. We need to be ceteris paribus, as before, because we want to know how the wage change, the price change affects your willingness to work hours at this job. Okay, so everything else about this job has to be exactly the same, and the situation has to be exactly the same through these three scenarios. Okay, so the place you're going to work has to be the same, the amount of work you have to do while you're there, who you're working with, how busy it is, how stressful it is, how nice the working conditions are, right? Everything about the situation is the same across these three scenarios, except how much they're willing to pay you. Okay. So for your part-time job, you could work 0 hours. If at a particular wage, it's not worth it to you to work at all, you could say 0. Or if you wanted to work a lot, the maximum you could work, we'll say, is 20 hours a week, which would be a part-time job. So you could, work the entire weekend or one weekend day and a few weeknights, but you can't drop out of 8th grade. So you can't do more than 20 hours, but you could not do a sport or spend less time with your friends or play less video games, right? So you can make other adjustments in your life where you can quit your club, okay? But you can't drop out of school, okay? So $5 per hour at your part-time job, how many hours would you be willing to work? Okay, so pause the video, think about it, write it down. How many hours would you be willing to work at $5 per hour? Okay. Then parallel universe, where everything else is exactly identical as it was before. Now they'll pay you $10 an hour, but everything else is identical. Okay, so now how many hours do you want to work in between 20 and 0 hours? Okay, then parallel universe, how many hours would you work at $15 per hour? Okay, everything else is the same, except the amount they're paying you. Okay, so probably your number went up as they were willing to pay you more, okay? So this is the data from one of the classes. So they were working at Taco Bell as their part-time job, okay? But it doesn't matter where you're thinking of as long as you're thinking of the same place the whole time, right? And we found that for this class, at $5 per hour, they were willing to work 102 hours. At $10 an hour, they were willing to work 104 hours altogether. And then at $15 an hour, they were willing to work 325 hours. Okay? And so everything was ceteris paribus, right? The only difference in these situations was how much they were earning, okay? So we can think about why that is, right? Why they were willing to work more hours as the wages increased, okay? Because if I had to guess, you might have originally guessed the opposite, that as the wage increases, workers would work fewer hours, which kind of makes sense because you might think, oh, well, if the worker wants to earn 100 hours, then they would have to work 20 hours at $5 per hour and 7 hours at $15 an hour, so they'd work less at a higher wage. But that's the opposite of what we see. Okay, and so the reason why at the higher wage the workers want to work more is because people think on the margin, right? They don't think about totals. They think about, for this next hour, I could spend it playing video games or hanging out with my friend or doing more homework or working, right? And at a low wage, it's really easy for you to say, no, $5 an hour isn't that much. I'm just going to hang out with my friends instead. Or I'm just going to do my homework instead. Or I'm just going to play video games instead, right? But at $10 an hour, and then even more so at $15 an hour, it's really hard for you to say, no, hanging out with my friend or taking a nap or whatever is worth more than $15 an hour, because $15 an hour is a lot of money, right? So it's really hard for you to say, no, I'm not going to work another hour at $15 an hour. Okay, so that's why the number of hours worked was really high. Okay, because it was hard for you to say no at that higher wage. Okay, so we plotted the points. So $15, 325 hours, okay, and so on. All right, so go ahead and pause the video to plot these and draw this in your notes. Okay. All right, so this illustrates the law of supply, okay? So the law of supply is ceteris paribus. As the price rises, the quantity supplied, we'll write this out, quantity supplied increases, right? There's this positive relationship, okay? So as the price goes up, you are willing to produce more, okay? And that's true for other sorts of producers too, right? So like a company that's producing its product, right, is gonna be much more willing to make more of the product as the price goes up and less willing to make the product as the price goes down. Okay, which is again counterintuitive if you're thinking in totals instead of marginals, right? So you might be like, oh, well, as the price goes down, the company has to sell more to make the same amount of money. But remember, people think on the margin, okay? So when the company sees the price going down, they're gonna say, oh, well, okay, now that we're making less money than we were before, why would we hustle and work really hard to make a lot if we don't get very much money from selling it, right? So as the price goes down, the company says, nope, I'm not gonna produce as much. That's not as worthwhile to me. Okay, and so that's what you felt as the wage was changing too. Okay, so the why for the law of supply, okay, is that as the price rises, the opportunity cost of saying no to making more rises. Okay, the opportunity cost of saying no to making more rises. Opportunity cost of saying no to making more rises. Okay, so it's harder to say, no, I'm not going to produce more at that higher price because you get a lot more money, right? And if this were a company, they're getting a lot more profit, right, by selling at this higher price. And so they're going to want to hustle and make more. Okay, whereas at the low price, the lower price, they're going to say, no, it's not very worthwhile. I'm not going to hustle, right? I'm going to go take a nap instead. I'm not going to make more because I don't make much money for making more. Okay, so remember, people think on the margin. Okay, and then we have supply versus quantity supplied. Okay, quantity. Okay, so quantity supplied versus supply. Okay, so quantity supplied versus supply. So this is just like what we did with quantity demanded versus demand, okay? But you want to pause the video and think about what changes quantity supplied. Yeah, it's just a change in the price of the good, okay? Price change, okay? Price change, or changed by price change maybe, okay? Changed by price change, okay? So if the price changes, the quantity supplied changes, okay? So we draw that like always, good A, right? Okay, so if the price goes down, sellers want to sell less. Okay, 2 points on the line with arrows. Oh, there we go, sorry. Price goes down, right? Price goes down, sellers want to sell less. Okay? Supply, right, changes. Okay, so supply means the entire line, right? This whole set of prices and quantities. So what could make this whole set change? Okay, pause it and think about what changed demand. Good. Yeah, changes with supply shifters. Supply shifters, yeah. Right, just like demand is changed by demand shifters, supply is changed by supply shifters. Okay? Changes with supply shifters, right? So we have our two shifts of supply, right? We have, good A, okay, right? And then if people are able to produce more of it, like it's easier to make, then supply increases. So we do sideways arrow always, S1 to S2, sideways arrow showing it's easier to produce, pointing at the higher quantity. Okay, so this is an increase in supply. increased supply. Okay. And then if it's more difficult to produce the good than before, okay, then S1 shifts in. Sideways arrow is always really important that you're not drawing diagonal arrows, okay? Because diagonal arrows are going to be so confusing on this, right? Because if you see sideways arrow, it's pointing in, supply is decreasing, that makes sense, lower quantity. Okay, if you draw a diagonal arrow, and don't ever do this because I'm going to show you why this is so confusing, okay? So if you do a diagonal arrow, right, so S1 to S2, does this look like supply is decreasing? Yeah, the upwardness of it usually makes people think supply is increasing, but this is actually a decrease in supply, okay? So that's why we never do the diagonal arrows. If you do the sideways arrows, you'll never be confused, okay? All right, great job, guys.